Good morning, this first day of the month of April, and welcome to Sunrise Daily. I'm Neota Igbe.
Good morning, I'm Malpo Gwen Yusuf. Welcome to the program.
And the birthday girl is back. I was looking forward to wishing you happy birthday here. Happy birthday, Malpo. It's good to have you back. I am Bukola Koka. Good morning and welcome.
Women supporting women. Hey, we're not left out of that. All of that love, we package it and give to you together on the show. Welcome to Lagos. I'm Kayode Okikelu.
Indeed, Kayode, men will also support men and support the women as well. But Mark,
well, thank you so much, Bukola, and thank you guys.
Welcome. Oh, you know, this thing about progress is for those who are willing to change, and if you're not ready to change your mind, then you're not ready to make progress or move any further from where you are. Indeed. I mean, I just heard that this morning, he struck a chord.
George Bernard Shaw. Thank
you very much. And to think that that's one of the things that the Nigeria police is thinking about, or it's been on for, I mean, we've had police reforms, these conversations around police reforms for such a long time, for as long as I can remember. It's been going back and forth, until a presidential committee set up to look into how the areas to reform, even down to the training curriculum. For that, I am very, very excited, because I know for a surety that it would make a difference immensely in the system of policing we have, not just in the system, in the people in the police force. You know, I always like to tell this story of my encounter with a policeman in Port Harcourt, and I was shocked, as in wondering, am I in Nigeria? We're coming out of the airport, and he says, tells the driver of the vehicle, says, "Please, may I see your particulars?" For a moment, I was like, hold on, am I hearing right? And he said, "Thank you very much, you may go." Then the driver now tells the other policeman in front who was talking to another driver, and says, "Hello, sir, please, I would like to move. Can you move?" Tell the driver to move. And the other one turns to him and said, "You want to tell me how to do my job?" In the space of 2 minutes.
You met two different
policemen.
Yeah.
But I have met policemen who are very, very professional. I've also met policemen who were very, very, very unprofessional. The two types of people are in the police system. But what the system is will determine to a large extent the product that will come out of that system. And to think that the police, the Inspector General of Police and the Presidential Committee, I mean, they met yesterday to collect the materials, what they've worked on and the areas they're going to go and how they're going to start. I was really excited to see that. But I look forward to actually seeing that, to seeing people like my friends who are in the police force. I have a relative who's in the police force as well. See their desires manifested. In Nigeria, I look forward to that day. I know some people will be like screaming, "No, what are you talking about?" I look forward to that day that our police would be the police that we desire it to be, where we can say, "Please hold up your hands. Hello, sir, you're under arrest. Please step aside." You know, that's be nice,
that
even as a policeman.
And upholding the law. Well, you know, I think it was Nelson Mandela who says it always seems impossible until it is done.
Yeah.
So who knows? I mean, right now, some people might only see the police force that they currently know, because it would seem that somehow the unprofessional police have, you know, overshadowed the work that the professional police do. And I can tell you for a fact that perhaps I might not have lived long enough to celebrate a birthday, but for the intervention of a group of policemen very early on in my life, in my family's life. You know, they saved my family. They heard that, you know, armed robbers were coming to our house. They had that intelligence. They looked for the house. They stood guard. Yes, and they caught they were really armed.
Looked for the house.
Yes, they looked for the house. I mean, well ahead of time. We were in shock as a family. My parents were, are you sure these police people are not the armed robbers themselves? But, you know, I mean, even with the doubts that we had, you know, even with the disbelief that we had, checking through all the step of the way, you know, with very good neighbors who were around at the time, we found out that they were actually genuine policemen who had intelligence before that time and who acted on the intelligence that they got and stood guard. I still can never forget the name of the police officer who led that team was Sergeant Jackson. Sergeant Jackson, if you ever get to, watch this program exactly, know that you're appreciated, because, the lady who's sitting down here might not have been alive today, because those people were heavily armed at the end of the day. So let us, whilst, yes, we feel as bad as we do about our police and we want so much better for them, let us not be discouraged. And I don't think that even the people in the force as well, the good people within the force too, should be discouraged. I look forward, I'm optimistic. Yesterday when I saw the document, even as it was being reported on TV, it felt like I should reach out and grab a copy and see what it was that they're going to be feeding our new set of police, or because it's not just going to be for the recruits, it's also for current officers and those who would train the trainers. Yeah. So let us hope, even though they say hope is not a strategy, I am optimistic that given all that we've been through, especially in the last couple of years, with young people realizing that, there is serious need. Initially, it started out with a lot of anger against Nigeria police, but even during the protest, a lot of people realized that even the police were victims.
Exactly.
And as
they are actually looking for the reform,
yes.
Many of them.
So there needs to be, let us hope that this would not just be something that ends on paper, and it will not just be a ceremony which we have all seen. We're hoping that this is something that will translate into something that reforms the police, changes the image and the work ethic of the average. We don't want to just be seeing the professional policeman once in a while, and we don't want it to be a surprise whenever it is we see them. We hope there's something that will translate between the rank and file and, give us a police force that we all can be proud of.
Indeed. Kayode, Bukui.
Well, absolutely. The police, it's actually, we're a team, right? It's not us against them. I think sometimes you get a sense of that either we think it is us against them or they think that it is you against us. But with this collaboration, I think it should drive home that point that it is not us against you. We're actually together on the same team. And, some of the areas that this particular reform we'll be looking at is ensuring accountability, transparency, demilitarization, also talks about welfare. And the police has also presented its side saying, yes, we're open to reforms, we want all of these things to happen, but hey, we also have needs. Talk about the construction of all those, police formations, barracks, and what have you. I think 120 of them. So I think it's a very delicate balance that we need to ensure we have in Nigeria. We also need to pay attention to the talk about just how many police officers do we have in Nigeria? Are they enough to protect us? How many of them are actually doing that work for the public? Don't forget, I think we had a guest yesterday that was talking about just how many police officers are guarding, private people, as it were, and politicians as well. So it's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I'm glad that this is being done right now, that this administration is paying attention to it, and the IGP has given his word. And this will largely focus on the police understanding the Police Act. Don't forget there's an enabling law which has been updated for the police, but how many of them actually have proper grasp of that? So this will be geared towards helping them better understand the Police Act and the presidential reform plan. So hey, you can actually see responsible policemen, not just 1 out of 10, but we're looking forward to having, I don't know if 10 out of 10 is too much to ask for, but hey, an improvement. Bukola.
Well, yeah, thank you, Kayode. Well, it's us, it's not, we're together.
Absolutely.
So it's not an us against them. And I'm not trying to be optimistic, but pessimistic rather, but perhaps because of the line of work, field of journalism that I've practiced over the years, I have come to interact with quite a number of police officers, and my story is not exactly the same as MPs and Malquez. I still had cause to visit the police station recently, and it was in fact a female police officer that I met that asked for the illegal tax unashamedly, and demanded as though it was, an entitlement. So, that's the experience. In my line of work, I've had cause to encounter policemen that have, been that have compromised in the line of duty and have been suspended as a result, So these are some of the issues. And a little leaven leavens the whole lump, as the Holy Book says. So this goes around within the force. Lagos-Ibadan Expressway is another kettle of fish entirely as far as the conduct of police officers is concerned. During at the peak of the gridlock last year, police officers were on the other side of the expressway that was free flowing, and their duty was not traffic free flow of conducting free flow of traffic, but to collect the illegal toll.
And which of the ends is that? Which of the ends of the
free flowing outbound
Lagos? Outbound
Lagos, yes. So these are some of the issues, but I'm glad that this standard operating procedure document that the IG of police has, launched in conjunction with the European Union and other partners, is a document that is like a collective commonwealth. It has not been produced in isolation. I believe, according to the report, that they're circulating the document to men and officers of the police force. So they know their needs. They know what they require in order for the force to be transformed. Kade talked about, the population of the force itself. We know the international best practice is supposed to be 1 to 4 citizens, but what do we have in Nigeria? The stories of inadequacy. So these are some of the issues. There's equipment. During the elections, we could also see the test of professionalism of the police, of the men of the police force. The promise was that those who are going to conduct electoral malpractices, thuggery of any form, were going to be given a bloody nose, but they were given a lot less than that. In fact, reports produced by CSOs were to the extent that electoral malpractices were conducted in the open glare of police officers, and they did very little. And we saw videos to that effect. So these are some of the evidences that would help to point to the direction where those reforms should go to. The accommodation, the barracks of the Nigeria Police Force is another matter entirely that should be looked into. Their accommodation, their welfare, equipment, and of course training. And then there's also the behavioral element to this. We could go on and on, but these are pointers to where those reforms should be directed to. NT and Malkwe.
Indeed, we look forward to that reform and the practicality of the documents that have been handed over to the police force. Every Nigerian, I look forward to the day when we'll see young people willing and joyful to join the police force and to serve their country. In some climes, actually, it's like a tradition from the grandfather, father, and all the way down, and everybody looks forward to keeping the tradition. But let's go on and look at what the papers are saying today. And we're starting out with the Vanguard newspaper. And here's that one, that conversation on subsidy removal says it will set Nigeria on fire. NLC warns. That story is on page 5. But see, the writers says incoming government should focus on local refining and not subsidy. Insists Labour won't accept fuel price hike in name of subsidy removal. I wonder how that will work. Deregulation, not subsidy removal. Better for Nigeria. That's coming from the oil marketers. And domestic refining of fuel, critical. CPPE. More of that story you find on page 5. Above the nameplate says this one there, Treasury looters using foreign currency exchange to launder funds. That's coming from Giaba. And that's warning. And then alleged treason, stop harassing people. Ayo Adebanjo Eliazu tell federal government. Tinubu presidency. I wonder how this will work out. Sanusi may return as CBN governor. And that's a strong one. You find that on page 9. And media groups tackle NBC over 5 million naira fine against Channels TV. That's on page 10. And you see that picture there of the former U.S. president. Indeed, that story was a big one around the world yesterday.
Indeed.
They said history was made. He was in court yesterday, not to be handcuffed. Neither were they going to take a mugshot of him. Those were some of the concessions they gave him as former president. But beside that picture, we have no power to track leak or leaked phone conversations coming from the NTC on page 4. And bandits insist on payment of 100 million naira ransom to free 56 abductees. sad story, but it's on page 6. And that's it from the Vanguard.
Well, the Guardian has this federal government Obi trade accusations on treason charge. It's a pretty serious story. It's on page 6 of the paper. Mohammed, Obi fanning insurrection. Obi, demarcating me, not good for Nigeria. Don't misinform international community. Labour Party cautions Mohammed. Reps condemn interim government plot. Tasks security agencies on vigilance. You find all of the details on page 6 of the paper. Nigeria's capital inflow buckles under rising risks, monetary tightening. So that story is also on page 15. It does look like the economy is going to be on a long road to recovery. I mean, when you look at this story and the fact that FDIs are at their lowest since 2017. Look at this test for Nigeria's Themis as Trump faces trial. So that is also on the front page as well. And NATO's border with Russia doubles as Finland joins. So stories on page 30 of the paper. We'll leave it there for the Guardian newspapers.
Well, let's take a look at Daily Trust. Daily Trust has this one on the 2023 polls. Take a look at it. FG accuses Obi Dati of treason. That's how the Daily Trust leads this morning. Accusations, malicious, fictitious. LP presidential candidate. CSOs caution government politicians against provocative utterances. And you say this one, an interim government doesn't look like this is going away anytime soon. Be on the alert. Reps tell security agencies. Anti-Tinubu protests staged at White House. And just final writer. Defense chief says Nigeria not under any threat. Okay, so yeah. You find all of that on page 5. How does this, or in what light does this place the DSS's statement now about some alleged plots to install an interim government, or at least get Nigeria to have an interim government, with the defense chief saying Nigeria is not under any threat? Well, take a look at the story for more details. Trump charged with falsifying business records. Yes, that happened yesterday. Been a long time coming. It's 2016 actually. So, well, that's the latest for that one. And just reminded me about the talk about, the police reforms and all of that. The police should be empowered for heavy lifting, such that no matter who you are, you can be arrested if you're found wanting. Okay, no preferential treatment. Just one more. Inflation erodes minimum wage by 41%. In 3 years. That's according to a report. What report is that? What does that mean for you? Is that your reality? Is it maybe even worse or better? More details on page 35. That's the Daily Trust newspaper.
From there, let's flip to This Nigeria. This Nigeria follows up on, the seeming spat, so to speak, between the federal government and the presidential candidate of the Labour Party. And this is the way it is rendered. Alleged treason, Mohammed Obi at each other's throat. Let's take a look at the riders. You've committed treason, says FG, that's federal government. Your claims are malicious, fictitious. Ex-Anambra governor replies, minister. I guess just a follow-up to the leaked audio in which there was a conversation between the presidential candidate of the Labour Party and general overseer of a certain ministry. So if you're interested in a bit more details, you find them on page 4, inside page 4 of This Nigeria. There's more to trail this morning. Beneath that, a follow-up on the indictment of the former president of the United States. Trump gets 34 indictments by U.S. jury. That's a page 11 read. INEC urges parties to inspect election materials in local government areas. Would it be for the presidential election or a follow-up to the dispute over the Rivers governorship election? You'll find details inside page 12. And lastly, the FCC seeks forfeiture of ex-Jonathan's ADC's cash in 7 banks. ADC, that's just an ADC. Cash in 7 banks. Well, if you're interested in details, you find them on page 14 of This Nigeria. Let's leave it there for This Nigeria.
Well, I'll take a look at New Telegraph now, and they have this one. Economic slowdown. Nigeria's unemployment rate to hit 41% over subsidy removal. That's according to KPMG. Says GDP in 2023 will grow at slow pace of 3%. Incoming government to face challenges, pressure on domestic prices to rise. Federal government halts proposed excise duty increase on alcoholic, non-alcoholic beverages. Senate rescinds decision on $22.79 billion federal government's borrowing for railway projects. So you might want to see what that decision was and what they're now saying now. Pages 2, 4, and 5 is where you find details. Take a look at this. Buhari seeks Senate's approval to refund Plateau, Borno State, 10.6 billion naira. That's also there on the front page. A number of other stories right there for you. Chrisland School, coroner orders late Whitney Adeniran's parents to testify on April 17. So that story is also there for you. Q4 2022, Nigeria's capital importation dips by 51.5% to $1.06 billion. So that is also on the front page of New Telegraph. We'll leave it there for the paper.
Well, let's direct you to Nigeria News Direct. Yeah, alleged treason charge. LP, FG fight over Peter Obi's leaked audio conversation. That's how the Nigeria News Direct leads this morning. LP debunks allegations, says Obi law-abiding, peaceful. I never discussed or encouraged anyone to undermine Nigeria. Obi react. You see this other one. I neither confirmed nor admitted leaked conversation. Spokesperson. So I think that's the crux now, a confirmation or denial. Some have already done some investigation and say, well, this sounds authentic. Well, they were hoping to maybe hear the presidential candidate of Labour Party speak to the authenticity or otherwise of that. But hey, that's where we're at right now. But there's also the conversation about your privacy, data privacy. Are you really secure as much as you think? Well, there's a follow-up to that one. NCC refutes allegations, commences investigation. So we'll follow up on that investigation and see what comes out of it. I imagine it shouldn't take too long, right, Bukola? That's Nigeria News Direct.
Well, that's the hope, and even though some would say hope is not a strategy.
We'll keep talking and maybe follow up.
It's essential.
Do a reminder from time to time.
Absolutely. From there, let's flip to Leadership Newspaper. Leadership Newspaper has this, as its lead story, something you'll be interested in. 54 days to inauguration. Tinubu headhunts best brains, competence for appointments, and the names on the list are interesting. Of course, one name has been mentioned earlier for the slot of the CBN governor, which is a former governor of the Apex Bank, Lamido Sanusi. But there are other names here that you'll be interested in. Just to mention a few, the governor of the Kaduna State, Nasir El-Rufai, is on the list. Former Commissioner for Information and Strategy in Lagos, Dele Alake, is also there. And the outgoing Speaker of the House of Representatives is also there. Of course, there's the current Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, and there's also the former Governor of Ekiti State and former Minister of Mines and Steel, Mr. Kayode Fayemi. So perhaps these are the names to look up to or look forward to as the inauguration approaches. But of course, we'll get confirmation in just a matter of months from now if these names are indeed authentic. But
let us know what you think. Are there names that you were hoping will be there, or names you think, okay, this would look good in the kitchen cabinet? Well, let us know. You can send us a mail or tweet at us. What are your expectations for this incoming administration? So yeah, that's that one.
And that's it for Leadership Newspaper, and of course it sums it up for the newspaper review. There's more we plan to unfold for you after this break. Stay with us.
addressing, debt sustainability, which seems to be at the heart of all of our discussion, we need to realize that, there are at least 4 parameters to look at. You should look at, fiscal deficit as a ratio of GDP. You should also look at debt stock as a proportion of your GDP. You should consider, how much cost of, financing your debts, that's debt service to revenue ratio. You should also look at, the foreign debt obligations as against your revenue. So I feel all of these ratios will be affected, by, this 80% debt service that we plan for 2023. That said, however, we need to allay some fears. Of these 4 metrics I mentioned, or 4 parameters I mentioned, Nigeria seems not to be doing too badly in at least 3 of them, except for debt service to revenue ratio, right? In keeping in tandem with that, the medium-term debt strategy, debt management strategy paper already indicated that we would increase our debt limit to about 40%, pardon me. Up from 25%. So we're not doing badly. For most countries that are peers of Nigeria, we're looking at revenue. We're not doing badly either. For 2023, we have $500 million Euro bond maturity. And apart from that, we're good for this year. Yes, revenues have been plummeting. We're at around $37 billion as of November 2022. But even then, we seem not to be faced with a situation where we're unable to meet our foreign obligations. So we'll not be borrowing well. So we can borrow better, and we can raise more revenue.
Welcome back, and that's where we're starting off. We're looking at Nigeria's public debt burden, and to help us clarify a couple of things, for instance, the country's total figure as at December 2022, which is standing at over 46.25 trillion naira, and I'm sure a lot of Nigerians are asking questions. What exactly is going on? How is this impacting our life? How is it going to impact the future tomorrow? The government is winding down, the new government's coming. How is this all going to play out? Well, in the studio with us here in Abuja, we have the Director General of the Debt Management Office in Nigeria, Ms. Patience Onia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
So, real quick, that figure, 46.25 trillion naira, yes. and a lot of people hear that and go like, what's happening? I mean, yes. Even in revenue generation, we've been talking about the budget of about 10 trillion, 13 trillion, 18 trillion, but we are owing this much.
Yes.
So let's start from here. Okay. Why do countries borrow?
Thank you very much. I think that's a good place to start. Countries borrow, so Nigeria is not the only country that borrows. The very advanced countries, including Germany, the US, the UK, all of these countries borrow. Okay, so borrowing is an accepted form to fund government activities. Okay, but we shouldn't end the story there. Borrowing should not be the only source or the major source of funding government activities, so there should be revenues, which is why the discussions around debt must naturally include revenues. One, because when you generate sufficient revenues, it reduces how much you need to borrow, but it also reduces your debt service to revenue ratio.
Okay.
And where we currently are is certainly not I don't know, some people are very concerned. I don't want to say it's good or bad.
Yes.
Because I do know that the Minister of Finance has constantly emphasized that we don't have a debt problem. What we have is a revenue problem. And there have been questions as to what precisely we're doing to shore up the revenues. But I want to know, what do you do in the debt management office? Do you advise? Do you say, no, you can't go past this? Do you what do you set limits? Do you say no, so far and no further? What precisely does the debt management office then do?
Okay, so with your permission, let me go back a bit. Like we said, the government borrows, but the debt stock is a combination of several items, so maybe we want to look at the basics. Nigeria's debt stock, the 46.25 trillion naira you mentioned, it includes the debt of the 36 state governments and the Federal Capital Territory. Everything, external and domestic. It's also right to say that the federal government is, responsible for most of that. About 84 to 85% on the average is FGN. So all of that is coming from these various sources. And then what are the triggers? Why is the debt stock growing? Because when the debt stock is growing, debt service also grows. Okay, the debt stock is growing because Nigeria has been running a budget deficit for many years, for decades, not years. In good and bad times with oil prices, we have borrowed. We've been running budget deficits, and those deficits are funded largely, 85 to 95% from borrowing. So that is cumulative. These are publicly available data. So that is cumulative. As you borrow each year, it adds up. So the annual budget deficits are a major component. So if you look at this year's budget size is 21 trillion. Borrowing is 10 trillion. We don't need to explain where that is coming from. So that's one angle. The other aspect where it is coming from also, we've contracted several loans in the past from multilaterals, meaning World Bank, African Development Bank, and bilaterals, Germany, India, China. And disbursements are going on because they are tied to milestone. Disbursements are going on, so that add up to it. The third part, which we must not forget, and I've been trying to emphasize, is government has been issuing promissory notes to settle obligations for which it doesn't really have the revenue or cash, if I may put it simply So that's why the debt stock has been growing. It's a combination of all of that, and these are done very transparently. As you know, borrowing is very, very regulated. So, we go to Federal Executive Council, we go to the National Assembly, and I think at each of those stages, the Nigerian public, have a role to play. They can speak, they can advise. So that's where all of that is coming from. But let us then explain what does the DMO do? Yes. So based on best practice with debt management, we do a debt sustainability analysis every year. As the word says, it is to tell you, is this my debt sustainable? So borrowing is not bad. Debt stock is not bad. What is important, I think two things. Use the borrowing well to stimulate growth, to create jobs, and then revenues will come, but also generate revenues. Okay, so that is not, so we do that debt sustainability, put in all those parameters, including exchange rate, interest rates, is a forecast over about 10 years to say, what does the debt stock look like? Is it sustainable in the short, in the medium, and in the long term? Okay, these are best practice World Bank templates that we use. That's one of it. So we advise the government based on our projections, and we don't do it alone. We work with stakeholders like the Central Bank, the Budget Office, the Bureau of Statistics, so that we can get all the data and brainstorm. I think over the past years, firstly, let me say in that report you will see that we tell the government over this next year, this is the maximum we should borrow. Included there as well is we've always said that debt is sustainable, but is very sensitive to revenue levels. Okay, and advice is given to that effect. This is where we should stop. Okay, so that's one. The other thing we do, obviously, so
your role is largely advisory.
Yes, it is advisory, and we do that through the instrument of the debt sustainability analysis. That's one. Largely advisory, responding to your question, but obviously we're the ones who do the actual borrowing. Okay, so there must be a strategy around how we raise those funds to make the debt sustainable. So we see that there is X amount to be borrowed. You can't just decide, okay, let me take what is available and wherever it's available from. You have to have a strategy around how you should do it to make your debt sustainable. So second tool we use is the medium-term debt management strategy. So we always have one. Again, these are best practice World Bank tools, which are extremely useful. It's a 4-year plan that says this is how we will borrow, raise the funds provided in the budget or for projects. And the idea is you want to minimize risk and costs. So yes, you have to raise this amount, but how should you do it to keep your costs or debt service low and to minimize your risk? That's the overall objective of that document. So again, that is a publicly available document, but I can give you what we're doing in that strategy to make debt sustainable. So the first thing is that you diversify your sources of funding. Obviously, if you are dependent on just one source, you could have in life you will have a problem. So we have several sources of borrowing. External, there's the international markets, there are the multilaterals, there are the bilaterals, meaning country to country. Okay, now we're looking very closely at export credit agency financing because those are project tied. But in the domestic market, I mean, the DMO has done well significantly in developing the market. It has worked for our benefit and worked for corporates as well. So, but what do? You would see that we have various products ranging from 90 days to 30-year tenors. The idea is that somebody who has money to invest can find something that fits them there. So we have Nigerian Treasury bills, which are short. We have the federal government of Nigeria bonds, which are all the way to 30 years. And then we have introduced a product for retail investors, the FGN savings bond. We talked about it at an event recently. And then very importantly, we have the Sukuk to attract non-conventional investors, if I may put it that way, as well as the green bonds. So while all of those are innovative, they are actually helping us to increase the sources from which we can raise revenues rather than what it was more than 10 years ago where the banks were our primary sources of funding. Okay, so we spread out the maturity. So we have different tenors. So when people talk about the debt, all of it is not maturing in one day. Are you with me? They're spread out over many years in the domestic and in the external markets. And then there are various products. Then every year we support that strategy with the debt sustainability analysis. So while it is true that debt service to revenue is high, it is not that the DMO within what is in its power, the strategy and the debt sustainability analysis, we are not doing anything. We are, but revenue remains the key. Okay?
So in terms of the revenue here, the revenue that's generated that's supposed to help to more like keep this debt profile at, how do you say that, at bay, or sort of keep it in one place, sustainable. I wanted to use the language that the everyday Nigerian will understand.
Moderate.
Keep it moderate. How much of that is happening in terms of the revenue generation that government is bringing in?
Okay. I think what we all know, again, I'm speaking to things that are in the public space, is that this administration, but let me speak for the Honorable Minister of Finance, on whose desk it falls, had focused on, and still focused on, revenue generation. Okay? Like I say, government should fund itself from revenues. Borrowing is supposed to bridge the gap. It's not the major source of funding. Okay. So there have been initiatives to grow revenues from non-oil. We know that we've been dependent on crude oil for a long time, for very many years, even though we have talked about diversification. So through a program called the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, launched by the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, I believe sometime in 2019, there was focus to increase revenues from non-oil sources. Okay, so that would be taxes, okay, duties coming from customs, taxes from FRS, and government-owned institutions, as we call them, GOEs or SOEs, where they're owned by the government, and the government as a shareholder should get some returns, isn't it? So it's focused on non-oil sources, but also oil, crude oil, coming from, let me put it this way, NNPC, whose name has changed now. So when you look at the budget, and I think we should be factual, in the short term, the bulk of the revenues will still come, or a significant part, not bulk, from crude oil, but on the non-oil sources area, on most of the parameters. So the amounts are not as large as it is for the oil sector, obviously, but there's significant progress. In some cases, those revenues have doubled. They've overperformed. But when the main source underperforms, then your entire revenue line underperforms. And that's why debt service is taken out very prominently, because in the actual budget itself, debt service to revenue would be anywhere from 28 to 33%. But when you then look at actual, because revenues underperformed, that's why you see ratios like 62, 90, and about this time last year, probably 116, okay? That's where it is coming from. So there are progress in that area. You know also what is going on in the crude oil sector. I believe there was a lot after the budget performance for January to April last year was presented. and we saw that crude oil production was 1.33 million barrels per day, whereas the budget is 1.88 million barrels per day. Even if the price was the same, we have lost money, right?
Yeah.
But just think about it, the price of crude oil more than doubled because of the Ukraine-Russian war. Crude was at over $100 per barrel. So that was a significant pull down in terms of performance. So that's why debt service to revenue is even worse when you look at the actual.
But we also know that as at yesterday, there was that news about Nigeria's crude, looking for buyers for Nigerian crude, not as much as it was being sought after before, again, because of a glut in the market space.
Yes.
But let's come back again. We know that there's that issue about the revenue generation for Nigeria, mostly dependent on crude. Yes, we have the non-oil revenue side, again, not enough as it should be.
But improving.
But that figure of over 46 trillion naira, let's go back there again.
Okay.
Now, in looking at it, it is known that the federal government alone has about 16 trillion naira, and states have about 1.9 trillion naira. I mean, looking at the figures as they are, but the total domestic debt on its own is about 27 trillion.
Yes.
Over 27 trillion.
Yes.
If you put all of that together, and of that 27, FG alone that's domestic.
Yes.
The 18 is foreign. Right? But domestic, FG alone has 22 trillion, and the state 5 trillion.
Yes.
In the debt management office, when you look at these figures, how do you feel? How does your office look at, okay, how do we move forward? Because you're supposed to keep it at a balance, a little below 60%, right, to GDP. Is that not what it's supposed to be?
Okay, when
debt to GDP here.
40%.
40%.
Total public debt to GDP.
What we have now.
It should be 40, but it is 23% now.
Okay. Are we hoping to get to 40? Please don't say yes.
Okay, I believe this is an opportunity to share information. Okay, so that ratio is 40%. Like I said, as of December, we were at 23%. When you just look at some of the key items that will hit the debt stock, and I think we should be factual, and one of the things I'm hoping to be able to achieve here is we are not in shock when the debt stock grows. Okay, you know there's 10 trillion of new borrowing in the budget for this year. So by December, if you see an increase of 10 trillion, you shouldn't be saying, how did it happen? Because it was there in the budget. Then there's the Ways and Means, which is in the public space before the National Assembly. That's 22.7 trillion waiting for approval. Then there's 1 trillion that was approved last year for the supplementary budget. So I wish I could tell you to stay at 46. But the point I'm making is there are already things that will be added to this. So once the Ways and Means is approved, for instance, the 22.7, it hits the debt stock. So that's, are you asking whether it will still, maybe by then we'll be approaching about 40%. But I think the issues around the Ways and Means are there. It's already been spent. So in the interest of debt transparency, you should include it in your debt stock once that approval is gotten. But let me speak to your issue around the FGN versus the states. So of the total debt, really, the FGN owns, on the average, 84 to 86% when you go back quarterly, half yearly. We do those numbers half yearly. In some ways, that is not to be unexpected because the Constitution gives the federal government more responsibilities. We're responsible for security, we're responsible for foreign affairs, and those things on the exclusive list. Okay, so we have those responsibilities. So that's why the share of the 36 states is lower. But the point to be made is that the debt stock has been growing from all of these angles. Okay, so for the FGN, for instance, if I may just look at my notes, so we gave the figures for 2021. Total was 33 trillion, 2021. 2022 is 38.9. For the states, they grew from 6.4 to 7.33. So they're growing from all sides.
Okay, so just before we take this to our colleagues in Lagos, there are a few questions I'd like to ask you. When a lot of people think about our debt profile, it does make them nervous. It makes the average Nigerian very nervous, especially when you now begin to see the controversy around the Ways and Means, the fact that the federal government should not borrow beyond a certain percentage of the previous year's budget, and the federal government obviously has overshot that, and there are questions as to how it can pay back that debt. So I'm wondering, as somebody who sits atop the management of all of this, do you get nervous sometimes?
I should say very clearly that I am concerned, and these days I'm more of a revenue advocate, because like I said, total public debt to GDP is about the lowest in Africa. And when you compare it, so countries like Kenya, Angola have over 60%. If you look at the other countries, the US, the UK, and Germany, they have over 100% of debt to GDP, yet their people are not screaming that debt is too much. That's because there's revenue to support it. You can service it. And I think before and I hope I'm not digressing from your question, I think you have to ask, is borrowing a bad thing? If you use it to stimulate your economy, invest in capital projects that will generate jobs, attract businesses, because if you have capital, then companies obviously can come and do business here. So both your GDP and revenues will grow, whether it is personal income tax or corporate income tax or levies or duties. It's supposed to stimulate growth. That's why you have that ratio of public debt to GDP. That is the relationship. Okay, so if you look at Nigeria's case again, from about 2015, there was a collapse in crude oil prices. The government had to do a supplementary, I believe, in 2016, and came up with a program called the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan.
The ARGP.
Yes, good. So what is important about that document, and there were a number of private sector experts who worked with the government on that document, what is important one of the important things to highlight in that document, it did say that government will stimulate growth by borrowing from local and external sources. So if you look at the budgets from 2016, you will see fairly high levels of borrowing than we had before. The idea is, okay, we'll do infrastructure, we'll create jobs, we'll do all of that. External borrowing was also to support external reserves. You know, when you borrow externally, the money goes to the central bank, but obviously they give us the naira to spend. So there was a strategy around it, and we shouldn't forget that the implementation of that strategy brought us out of recession. And then if you look at the debt narratives, after that, you will see the new borrowing started declining marginally up to the first 2020 budget. Then COVID happened. We had to rework that budget. And since then, borrowing has sort of, yes, keep going up. But we did perform better than projected in 2020 and have still been growing. So debt in itself is not a bad thing, and I think we need to disabuse ourselves from that.
I think a lot of Nigerians know that. The question is whether, you know, they are right to be nervous when they see the fact that revenue is not exactly accompanying the debt that we currently have. But I know that my colleagues in Lagos are dying to get their questions through. So over now to you.
So we need revenues. Yes.
Over now to you, Bukola and Kayode.
Well, thank you, Maupe. Just to follow up, really, because I'm looking at some of the statements that have been put out by the IMF, for example. Just a quick follow-up to the question Maupe just asked. And, you know, I think it was last year that the IMF raised concerns that at that point our debt servicing to revenue was 76%, and the projection was that if care is not taken by 2026, it will be 100%. And I think that speaks to why you're maybe a revenue advocate right now, because these things stand on different legs. So let me just ask you, we need to have a perfect understanding again of just what we're in, so we maybe are able to proffer solutions. Nigerians are also able to better understand, support government, hold government accountable. This talk about the incoming government inheriting 77 trillion naira debt. I've done the math, adding the 46 trillion naira to the 22.7 trillion naira ways and means, the extra 1 trillion naira for the supplementary budget. It doesn't quite add up for me, so I don't know. Can you give an insight as to that 77 trillion naira figure that is always thrown around from time to time?
Okay, let me explain that figure. Thank you very much. That was a projection, and at the time that projection was made, we had the debt figures for this September 2022, which was 45, now it's 46. And as I said earlier, you already have ways and means of 22.7, so just add that to 46. You're already at about 69. There's another 1 trillion Ways and Means approved in December for the supplementary budget. So you're at 70. On top of that is the fact that the state governments and the FCT would borrow, okay? So an estimate was included in that number. Then there will be disbursements from loans that we had contracted years back from multilateral and bilateral sources. These are the World Bank and similar institutions, as well as country-to-country loans. That will come from there. Then there are promissory notes that we're issuing. So that's how, then you add the, for the new borrowing in the budget, about 5 trillion was provided from that we would be able to raise 5 trillion out of the 10 trillion of new borrowing. And that's how the 77 trillion was arrived at. It's based on just adding all these other numbers. It's not only Ways and Means. There's new borrowing in the budget. There's new borrowing that will happen from the state governments. There are promissory notes that we're issuing. We have over 1 trillion naira of that in the debt stock. Okay, then there are also those disbursements that would happen. And I think, I don't know why I want to move away from the fact when we say the incoming administration will inherit. Will inherit, but all of these were borrowings that were duly approved. Some are still in, like the Ways and Means of 22.7 is still in the process of being approved. The 1 trillion already has been approved. So keep those in mind, and I'd like to clarify that. So if any of these assumptions doesn't happen, then it won't be 77 trillion, okay?
Right.
And it's total public debt, not FGN only.
Right. It's important to
That's
also...
as far as the maths go for the 77.
Okay, so the update should be if those projections go right, all of the incoming governments at federal and state levels might be inheriting that, not just, the incoming president, as, the message hits home from time to time. But we need to ask this, really, because a lot of Nigerians see those figures, and as Mark said, they feel anxious. In fact, it's now a political discussion. It's an easy way to maybe discredit a government. It's an easy way to campaign as well, saying, well, look at those debt figures. I'm going to ensure we get out of it. Or why will the government borrow this much and there's not as much to show for it? Is there a time when we'll ever get out of borrowing? Yes, you have said that countries borrow, but is there ever a time where we're hoping and perhaps we'll get out of this borrowing cycle? Is that utopian?
Okay, no, I think that would be my wish, if I must confess publicly. That would be my wish. But you still have a debt stock you are dealing with, right? So that doesn't disappear. Those are contractual obligations. You still have to service them, as and when they are due. So the borrowing that you can curtail, I think, which is the major contributor to the growth in debt stock, is really the borrowing in the budgets, the annual budgets. Just go back 20 years. You would see every year there was a deficit and it was funded by borrowing. Okay, so how will that happen? It will happen from two ways. When revenues grow significantly to finance the government's, the FGN. So on this one, I'm speaking to the FGN. I can't speak for the states. When the government's revenues are sufficient to finance its expenditure. Okay, the other thing also is there something you can do about expenditure? In order to bring it closer to your revenues so that you don't have a deficit, because the budget is a product of, revenue less expenditure, and then this large deficit shows up. So those are two things you can do. You can look at your revenues, you can look at your expenditure, and that will impact automatically on whether you need to borrow or not. But if you ask me, do we have prospects, do we have potentials? Yes. So why is the revenue not coming as it should? We've talked significantly about what could have happened last year if we took all the windfall that came from very high crude oil prices. Countries like Angola, an oil-producing country like Nigeria, did very well on those, and the economy, has improved significantly. The countries in the Middle East who are oil-producing countries also did very well from that windfall. Even if you didn't produce a barrel more than you should, your revenues just doubled from oil. So just imagine what that would have done for us. So maybe we need to look at those revenue lines. What are we not doing that we should have been doing? So I understand production has gone up a bit, and speaking to the comment this morning, OPEC is, I think, attempting to reduce production to take prices up. But yes, we can interrogate revenues, be more mindful of revenues, and I think, if you ask me, I think we have focused more on the debt issue as opposed to being very sensitive to the revenue issues. Thank you.
Still on your mandate, as you say, being in an advisory capacity, but this time as it relates to states, states also sometimes have to borrow, and you have said that borrowing is the norm, that countries need to borrow to stimulate their economy. But as it has to do with states now, I wonder if the advisory mandate of the Debt Management Office also extends to states, because in the past, the requests by some state, a certain state now, to borrow caused not a little ruckus, at the National Assembly. So in comparison to their charge to generate revenue internally, what's the advisory capacity of the DMO to states, and does it also conduct that debt assessment for states as well, and advise states on how to go about borrowing as well?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just rephrase the language where you say countries need to borrow. Quoting me as saying countries need to borrow. The language more is that it is not unusual or uncommon for countries to borrow, but you should use it to stimulate your economy. Not need. If you have a balanced budget, you don't need to borrow. As a country, if your revenues match your expenditure, you don't need to. Okay, so that is not the language, if I may just correct it. But you asked a very important question as to what do we do with the states, whether we provide advisory service. Yes, the DMO does have a dedicated department that looks after the states. That's how come, working with them over the years, we're able to know what their domestic debt data is. So before we knew the external only, because based on the Debt Management Office Act, it's only the federal government that can borrow externally and then on-lend to the state. So we knew those figures. But in working with them, at least we've been able to establish their debt data, and we publish it, every 6 months. So that's step one. To be able to advise somebody, you need to know what they have. Okay, so included in that program is training support for the states. All of the states that have been, collaborated with us, we've done capacity building for them. Essentially, what we were trying to do was to create a similar DMOs at the state level, so that they can do all the same things we're doing, advising their state governments, doing their own debt sustainability analysis and their medium-term debt management strategy. I should say in that regard, we provided advisory services for them, but we've also been privileged to be part of the SIFTAS program that we worked with on the World Bank. So now, but even before then, all the states have their own debt management departments. Some call it units, but essentially they are DMO at the federal, replicated at the state level, to provide similar services to their government that we provide. We've trained them on things like the debt sustainability analysis and the medium-term debt management strategy. And I'm happy to say some states have already done that and submitted reports for us to evaluate. And that is still going on. Okay, so we do provide I would say very significant, maybe intense services to the state governments in that regard. And the rules that apply to the federal actually apply to them as well. If a state wants to borrow, it has to go to its state executive council, and then it goes to the state assembly as well. So those rules apply as well.
Still on our revenue, we've been experiencing a decline with the Forex reserve, but a strong point that has been advocated in favor of Nigeria is that we have 500 million naira euro bond. How much of that is a shock absorber, to the declining foreign reserve that we have, and indeed, our borrowing escapade, so to speak?
Okay, I don't think it's an escapade to the extent that your borrowing is properly documented and approved, so I won't use escapade. It's properly documented and approved as required by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The reason I'm trying to change some of the words is because these are the things that give sometimes the public the impression that the present administration, sometimes the go personnel has raised so much. So let's go through. There's a process. There's an engagement. There's a public hearing on all of those borrowings at the National Assembly, including, the medium-term expenditure framework. So let's not be like it just happened. We just saw the numbers in the books. Speaking about external reserves, I think one of the things the rating agencies have commended us on, including even Moody's, again, I did say one of the tools we adopt is to have different maturities. So Nigeria is one of the only countries that doesn't like have several. I won't mention some of the other countries that you may be familiar with. So all we have maturing this year, when I say all, I don't mean it's a small amount, but it's a $500 million Eurobond. So we spread maturities each year so that there are no 3 maturities each year. This is just one that is maturing. The next one, I believe, is about 2 years' time unless we issue, spread out over 30 years. Okay, so that it's not a big sum that comes and you are panicking, what do I do? That's the case that has happened with at least 2 countries, and about 2 others are going through that issue. So talking about the $500 million Eurobond maturing in July, the first thing I think I like to say is that when those funds are raised, they come in as dollars into the Central Bank of Nigeria. So if you just go back and track the data, you will see each time we issue a Eurobond, give or take 1 week after that when settlement takes place, external reserves shoots up by that exact amount. So it's not a loss that it is coming, it has to, at some point it has to go out because it's a loan, which is why revenues are important. They don't leave you, they stay with you. Okay, so when that matures in July, we would pay the $500 million. And let me explain that debt service is very carefully planned. Not only do you have it in the budget, so you see the lines, you see the domestic, you see the external. It doesn't just, okay, we're just being told something is happening here. No, it's planned and provided in the budget. But beyond that, underneath the surface, so both the Honorable Minister and the Central Bank have information on what is maturing monthly on external debt, because you need to plan for it. So it's not, and that's one of the things I like to explain. It's not an ad hoc impromptu arrangement. These are all done well in advance, and the Central Bank has all the details, including the currencies. So we can all plan, and we know that this is what, so those have helped Nigeria, and that is part of the debt management that we do behind the scenes. Apart from borrowing, you have to do all of this work to ensure that what is within your power, you manage the risk.
Well, the SIFT, as you mentioned, just takes us to the next question, naturally, about transparency and accountability. And for a lot of people, they were a bit skeptical about why there needs to be some sort of incentive to achieve transparency and accountability, which was what the World Bank assisted funding or project was trying to achieve. I mean, it should be a culture. Naturally, when you get money, the people who you report to should know how these monies are spent, and they don't need to stress themselves to get these details. Audit is another conversation entirely. But overall, because a lot of Nigerians are particularly interested in our borrowings, because they see the figure and they try to look around and say, okay, can we see what these monies have been used for? What have you found out in terms of transparency and accountability, whether these monies are used well? Do you see indicators that maybe point to the fact that these monies are used well? We're in a good place when it comes to borrowing and utilization.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the SIFT's question, I'll just answer that very simply. If you've been trying to achieve something to encourage people to do something and it doesn't happen, if there's then an incentive to get it done, I don't think anything is wrong with that. And the reason for that is to say, look, whether you talk FGN or states, it's still one country and one GDP. Okay, so if you can get all your data, like for the federal, you get budget performance, you get budget, you get projections, you get all of those. But prior to SIFTers, you didn't have those information from the states. People couldn't get the budgets for the states, they couldn't get, so you couldn't do a Nigeria total analysis. So we look at spending as only what the federal government spends. No, there are 36 state governments and an FCT. So that's what SIFTers was meant, one of the key objectives. So we can have macro data and macroeconomy. Just remember that the GDP is one and it is one country. So to that extent, if the incentive has helped with that, so you can go to a state government, you can, some of them have passed their own similar DMO laws, similar fiscal responsibility acts. Their budgets are there, their annual reports, some of them are now rated. If those are the things it has achieved to encourage transparency, I think it is good. What you couldn't achieve in 10 years, if SIFTers helped you to achieve a number of it, I think that is good. So in terms of what have we done with the borrowing, I will speak very gladly about the Sukuk. I don't think I need to say too much of that. We have issued over 740 billion of that. Firstly, it was to attract, an investor component. Like I said, diversifying your sources of funding. That's one objective. Promoting financial inclusion. But we can't deny the roads and the bridges that we have seen arising from the Sukuk across the country. Okay, so initially up to 2020, the proceeds were for works, the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing. But from 2021, we included the FCT. So many of us who don't go outside of Abuja started seeing what the Sukuk is doing. So I don't think I need to talk too much about there's no state in Nigeria that you go to, you won't see roads and bridges that have been funded by the Sukuk. So that's one. And the fact that it was dedicated to infrastructure is one of the driving forces for the DMO to continue to issue the Sukuk. Then when you say what else have we done, I think if you look at the airports, both in Abuja, the new airport in Abuja, look at the one in Lagos, which I think is dedicated, is dedicated to travel within Africa. You look at the other airports in Port Harcourt, Benin, Kano, and Enugu. Those are coming from loans. Then you look at the rail lines that you have. Those are coming from loans. So I don't think we live with these things, we see them. We shouldn't say we haven't seen what the loans were used for. Maybe there should be more, and that will be good. But we do have definitely, and we should not say we can't see what has been done with the borrowings.
Well, that is difficult to, contradict. Of course, we've seen even the second Niger bridge as well. I noted that you said earlier that total public debt to GDP is one of the lowest in Africa, even though total public debt to GDP is set to increase to 43%. But I just wanted you to also look at, comparatively other parts of Africa, the creation of value. If you look at those countries, their export to import ratio, they're doing a lot better than Nigeria in that regard. So if you look at that aspect, are we in a comfortable place, to be? Because also debt to revenue ratio is a sort of is a subject of concern to the international community as well. My colleague Kari said earlier that the IMF has raised concern that it has overshot, the best practice level. So what are your thoughts in that regard?
Okay, I think probably one of my first statements was to say debt to GDP is 23% as at December, and that is still within the 40% limit for the government set for itself. And let me add, within the 55% set by the IMF and the World Bank. So that still is not an issue. Just if I may go to the data, if you look at Angola, that ratio is 136%. If you look at the US, it's 133. If you look at the United Kingdom, it is 104. If you look at commodity countries like, so Angola is one of them, Kenya is 67.57. Okay, so yes, I did say when all of those loans, the ways and means, for instance, comes in, we could be inching close to 40%. And that is a fact, not 43, but that is a fact, the numbers are there. So what is the challenge? The challenge is debt service to revenue. So let me run through some numbers. So these are World Bank data. It's the World's Economic Outlook by the World Bank for 2020. So the debt to GDP ratios I quoted is from that report. But when you look at revenue as a percentage of GDP, so Canada has 41.9, the UK has 36.6, Kenya has 16.6, Angola 20.9, South Africa 25.2. What does Nigeria have? 6.3%. And based on this report, there were 194 countries, I believe, or 192 countries that the World Bank included data for. Nigeria was number 190, and guess who the other two countries are in terms of revenue to GDP ratio? The other two countries are Yemen and Afghanistan. So the issue is that where we belong? Should Nigeria be performing in terms of revenue at the same level as Yemen and Afghanistan? And I deliberately, include African countries in that regard. Kenya, Ghana, Angola, their ratios are much higher than ours. So I think we can't but talk about revenues. So revenue to GDP for Nigeria is among the lowest, not just the lowest, among the bottom in the world.
I know that even that, having conversations around revenues is also going to make a lot of Nigerians nervous because, the revenue is not going to be gotten from the sky. It's most likely going to come from Nigerians themselves and maybe other
entities, yes,
other sources of income within and maybe outside of the country. But let me quickly ask you how exchange rate I mean, the fact that our exchange rate is, being fluctuating, and in many instances, we've seen the wide gap between official rates. Even official rate has gone up, and also the parallel market. What effect is that having on our revenue profile? And I do not know also how you are looking at this discussion around subsidy, because it's back on the front page, and for a number of people, that's another thing that, we know that our subsidy for a long time was being funded through under recovery from the NNPC, but now is an item in the budget. What is the projection of the DMO with regards to subsidy removal, and maybe how it could improve our revenues or, impact our debt profile?
Okay, so the first thing to say with regards to subsidies, so gladly, that is not in my remit, but let me say what the official issues are. So you know that in the budget for 2023, subsidies were included up to June this year. And in the first presentation of the medium-term expenditure framework for 2023 to 2025, the minister presented two scenarios, one with subsidies, one without subsidies. But obviously, we still went through with the one that keeps subsidy till June. So what has that done? Is increase your deficit. And the next level, what did it do? You're borrowing. So I always said there's this link, and we're missing that link of how the new borrowing arises and the debt stock appears. So go back to what I said. Perhaps we should look at revenues and look at expenditure. So subsidies and expenditure is an expenditure line in your budget. So I just made that general statement. But that's how to manage your deficit, and probably in response to the question she asked, reduce your level, or he actually reduce your level of new borrowing. Yes. None of them is in isolation. They are linked. The budget is, they are linked, And
the exchange rate.
Okay, so talking about exchange rate, when I say government, I'm talking fiscal now. So the fiscal doesn't operate at the parallel market rate.
Indeed.
So our transactions are at the official rate. So what is happening in that sector really doesn't affect our books.
All right, thank you. I think that's a good place to leave it, even though I have one other question I've asked you, but we'll leave that for the next time we get you here. Mr. Patience Onia is the Director General of the Debt Management Office in Nigeria. Thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sunrise Daily will be back in a moment. Please don't go away. And thank you for staying with us. We're back again. This time we're going to the National Assembly, looking at how setting an agenda for the 10th National Assembly. That matter of who's going to lead the 10th Assembly is a question that everybody's been going back and forth. Some are lobbying from different quarters.
Excuse me.
Okay, but then we have Dr. Ernesto Becker here to help us understand setting an agenda for the 10th Assembly. He is an associate professor, Department of Political Science, University of Abuja. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we'll just go straight in. The elections have come, they're done. But National Assembly, 10th National Assembly will kick in real soon. If you want to look at the way it is, there are some newbies that have come in. Some new political parties have walked into the National Assembly, albeit on the platform of the people's mandate. What would you say the National Assembly in the 10th will be looking like?
Well, as you rightly said, it will be an assembly of greenhorns, largely, so to say. Greenhorns, not that you are having people falling from the blues, no, but people who don't have legislative experience and background, because out of the about 425 or 26 seats declared so far, we're having about 306 new members in both chambers of the National Assembly, with about 43 seats left to go. And so it's an assembly that will be made up of greenhorns. And of course, we know that what means, it means that there will be capacity gaps. It means that there will be some period of learning. It means that we'll be losing the experiences of the old members who didn't make it back, to the assembly. It equally means that we'll be losing a lot of resources we had invested in those new members that are not returning to the assembly. It equally means that we'll be budgeting more money for the capacity development of these new members. Of course, you have to expose them to parliamentary practices and procedures. You have to expose them to the various issues, as far as legislation is concerned. So it is an assembly that will be made up of about 70% new members. In the Senate, for instance, we have only about 28 senators returning as at the last count. About 73 are going to be new senators. And so it is an assembly that will be in the learning process for quite a while. In
the learning process, wouldn't there be room to have new ideas as well?
Of course.
I mean, even in the Senate, you have 70 out of 100, a little over 100 being new.
Yes.
We're seeing new ideas on how to handle it.
Of course, you will have new ideas about how to handle things, but you can't substitute that for experience. Globally, in parliamentary practices and tradition, experience counts so much, and that is why in some climes it is almost like a career. A legislator is almost legislation is almost a career thing, and so experience is very, very key in legislative issues. And our own case is even made worse because of the fact that we don't invest so much on building the capacities of legislative staff who are the institutional memory of the legislature. And so we'll be having, yes, you have new ideas, but that experience matters so much as far as legislation is concerned.
Okay, let me quickly ask you this. I mean, for a number of Nigerians or those watching you, all they've heard you say is how much we've lost in terms of capacity and resources invested. First, we have to ask if Nigerians appreciate these things during an electioneering process. Oftentimes, there is a discontent with how the National Assembly is run, and whether you also think that there's anything as gained. My colleague talked about new ideas, but some people will also say that perhaps passion might also be some, because those the greenhorns, as you've described them, might also be coming in with a different level of passion. Maybe new ideas might not exactly get them very far, but at least the little that they're able to pursue, perhaps they might be able to pursue with some passion. Would you agree with that?
Yes, of course there will be some passion, especially given that, there was a lot of interest in the election. We saw new political parties, coming on board, and the assembly, the 10th assembly, will be the most diverse as far as party representation is concerned, because we'll be having about 7 or 8 political parties in the assembly, and so that passion will be there. The passion, to bring on board the new ideas that we have talked about. Of course, all of that will be there. And then again, also, while we talk about the high rate of return, we also know that it is a demonstration of that democratic spirit in Nigerians, that Nigerians are determining and deciding who will represent them, who will speak on their behalf. And so as a member of the parliament or as an elected public officer, you no longer take it for granted that the people will always, send you back to your position. And so if you do not perform as a representative, as a legislator, as a senator, as a member of House of Representatives, or the State House of Assembly, for instance, the people will always be there, to take back their mandate and hand it over to whoever they believe, will better discharge that responsibility. Yes, there will be that passion.
Yeah, but so while that might be an issue, I mean, while underperformance, at least the people's perception of your performance might be one of the issues. Do you also think that the Nigerian public understands sufficiently how the National Assembly works? for them to be able to appreciate what it might mean, the role of experience in sending back a legislator over and over again. I give you an instance. In some states, they have a rotational thing in communities or in local governments. It was the turn of this local government the last time, it's the turn of this local government the next time. You know, those sort of dynamics that come to play in terms of trying to give balance. Do you think that we understand sufficiently the importance of experience? I'm not saying that, you know, it's all of them that have, you know, the experience or have, you know, pulled their weight in the National Assembly. But for those who do you think that there is sufficient understanding of the role that these kinds of things come to play?
Okay, I think, you know, we say every politics is local. And so these rotational issues, you know, go a long way to determine who goes to the National Assembly and who doesn't get to the National Assembly. But again, there are so many other factors that are responsible for the high, you know, turnover rates at the National Assembly. You talk about the influence of party leaders, you talk about the influence of governors. Of course, these days we know that the Senate, for instance, is almost becoming a retiring home of governors, and so incumbent senators may not return if you have a governor who is interested in your seat. And so those factors are there. But when you ask, do Nigerians appreciate the fact that experience matters as far as legislation is concerned? I would say I haven't seen that given the trend of our elections. Because if you take since 1999, we have continued to talk about this high rate of return in the National Assembly. And so it means that we are yet to understand that the legislature needs some level of consistency, needs some level of stability in order to continue to benefit from the experiences, the capacities of members of the legislature. And so if you take the trend, if you take the high rate of return at the National Assembly, we can conclude that yes, Nigerians do not really appreciate the fact that experience matters so much as far as...
So the high rate of return or high rate of no return, that's, yes, of non-returning to the National Assembly. Let's quickly take this conversation now to my colleagues in Lagos.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm just trying to understand what is being proffered here, because, I mean, are you trying to say that maybe there should be some sort of arrangement where the lawmakers get longer tenure such that they don't leave after a certain time, or you're just trying to paint it as it is, not proffering any solution? But that aside, my major question now is about the emergence of the presiding officers, whom some have said that should be really first among equals, not to see it as, leaders. I mean, we're equals, but maybe first among presiding or officers of the National Assembly. Some people have declared interest. Some have even gone to the extent of saying, well, it is my turn. I am a high-ranking member. Maybe that ties to the point you're trying to make. But seeing also the makeup, the greenhorns, 70% or maybe even more, are actually new members. Do you see the emergence of the familiar faces, maybe some of the people who have declared interests, or do you see the dynamics changing with the current makeup, the new makeup, which is largely new members?
Okay, when you talk about the election of presiding officers of the National Assembly, it is equally guided by certain rules and laws. And so if you go to the Senate and the House of Representatives, the standing rule of the chambers will determine how these presiding officers will emerge. And I know that the rule provides that experienced members will be nominated for those positions, even though it is not stated in the Constitution, but the standing rule of the House and the Senate provides that it is only members with legislative experience that are nominated for that position. And so, yes, we have many new members coming, but I want to believe that eventually the rules of the two chambers of the National Assembly will be deployed in determining who wins and then who presides over the 10th National Assembly. And so, yes, we'll still see the old faces, preside over the 10th National Assembly. given the provisions of the standing rules of the two chambers of the National Assembly. I don't foresee a situation where we'll have new members, those who are just coming in, preside over, the 10th National Assembly. Yes, we can say that in the 8th Assembly, we saw a new member emerge as the majority leader of the opposition. I mean, the minority leader of the opposition party then. But that was an internal party thing. But we are now talking about the entire the leadership of the entire National Assembly itself. The rules provide that you pick from ranking members of the National Assembly.
Besides speaking from ranking members, there's a new dimension to the politics of the Assembly this time around. It seems so with the 10th Assembly, because if you look at the House of Representatives, the number of the lawmakers in the opposition combined is more than that of those in the ruling party. Going through the numbers now will take some time, but do you see us starting another debate of the Second Republic where the opposition is looking at producing the leadership because their minority seems to be in the majority above the numbers of the main party, the ruling party?
Okay, again, the ruling party will not fold its arms. It will equally, just as the opposition parties will be seeking to build alliances, the ruling party will equally build alliances with some of the opposition political parties. And so if they are able to successfully build these alliances, then I don't see the opposition political parties producing, presiding officers of the 10th Assembly.
Oh, okay, Dr. Ereke, this National Assembly, what should Nigerians be expecting from them, besides their leadership and all of that? Yes, a lot of them are new. But what should they be looking out to do for the Nigerians that elected them into office? Seeing that, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, after 4 years, these citizens are ready to throw you out.
Exactly.
By what we've seen with the last election.
Yes, so in terms of setting agenda for the 10th Assembly, there are a lot of issues that this Assembly will be faced with.
That's right. Let's just look at maybe 2 or 3 that they should kick off looking at.
Of course, given the acrimony that we went through during the elections, I would want to believe that this 10th Assembly will equally again be looking at further amendments of our electoral laws. And then I also believe that the 10th Assembly in looking at tinkering with the Constitution, the issue of local government autonomy will equally again come up. There are issues there are security concerns, there are economic challenges, and I want to believe that security challenges, the economic challenges, local government autonomy, further electoral reforms, will form part of the agenda of the 10th National Assembly.
When you talk about the local government autonomy, you do know that this assembly, the 9th Assembly, actually amended the Constitution at that, but at the states level,
it was rejected.
Do you think that would change?
Okay, so you recall that even the financial autonomy of state houses of assembly at some point was rejected by the state houses of assembly, and so.
But now that has
passed through, and so I equally believe that if we continue to push, if we continue to urge the states, to pass it, it will scale through. Now, the problem with the local government autonomy passing through is the challenge we have with governors who want to continue to preside over the issues of local government. They want to continue to control the funds of local government, and that is why these things don't pass through, at the state level. But if we continue to push, if we continue to agitate, and if the National Assembly work out a modality with the State House of Assembly or Conference of Speakers, I'm sure that eventually this will pass, at the state level, just as the financial autonomy of state houses of assembly equally passed.
Okay, I just want to quickly mention the fact that you said electoral reforms as well.
Further electoral
reforms.
We
just got the new Electoral Act 2022. What exactly will you be looking to see in terms of further electoral reforms?
Okay, fine. It is not really what I would be expecting, what I would want to see in further electoral reforms. But given the challenges, given the acrimony that trailed, the recently concluded elections, I want to believe that electoral reforms will form part of the agenda of the 10th National Assembly. I mean, civil society organizations will come with requests. We'll have election observers will come with, requests. We'll have even the international development partners who equally monitored these elections. They will come up with their reports, and in their reports, they will make certain recommendations requesting for further electoral reform. So I want to believe that the 10th Assembly will most likely consider electoral reforms as part of their agenda, the legislative agenda.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ernest Tereke. Thank you for coming in this morning, and thank you for your thoughts that you've shared with us today. Dr. Ernest Tereke is an associate professor, Department of Political Science from the University of Abuja. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sunrise Daily will be back in a moment. Do stay with us. Welcome back, and with this time we're going to Delta State and looking at the internal wranglings within the All Progressives Congress in that state. Remember the issue of the expulsion of the Deputy Senate President and the expulsion of Mr. Cairo Ojugbo from the party. Well, these are some of the things we'll be looking at with Mr. Samuel Omogo, who's a member of the All Progressives Congress in Delta State. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
What's causing the rancor within your house in the APC in Delta State?
Okay, it's a good question to ask what's causing the rancor. But the simple answer is that a man who got into a position of authority and decided that he did it alone, and he is the all in all, and he is the only one that can make decisions for the party, that the party is his own personal property, hijacked the entire party structure, which was actually handed over to him, because he was accepted into the party. That's talking about the Deputy Senate President of Yoma Agege, who actually won the election in his first time through the Labour Party. Then from where he decamped to APC. And then immediately he was made the Deputy Senate President. He became a mini-god that nobody else must say anything. It must either be me, or he's the most senior, the highest political office holder in the state.
I would like to stop you there for a moment, because the Deputy Senate President is not here to respond to this allegation.
Okay.
But then yesterday we had a Mr. Efe Ofobruku here, who was alleging that the major issue in the APC is being caused by Cairo Ojugbo.
Okay. Yeah, Henry Efeduku is my brother and very good friend. He's the Deputy Senate President's special assistant. So what would you expect him to say? Of course, he will come here to to defend his principle.
Okay, let's do it this way. Okay. We'll play a film. You listen to it, and then you can maybe it'll help you respond to that question. Let's get that track.
I am very sure if you look at your archives, you have the records of those who emerged as the executive committee of the APC in Delta State. And those names, those characters you are seeing on the so-called letter purportedly written by the school.
That's the Lebo Isaac you're referring to.
Yes, those, you know that those are not those names you see, they do not constitute the structure of the party. The state chairman of APC in Delta State is Mr. Omeni, though an elder in church, so most people refer to him as an elder. Omeni Sobotie is the state chairman of APC in Delta State. His name is not on that list. That is to tell you that the names you see there are just pretenders. But most importantly, 80% of those names written there were written without the knowledge and consent of the people.
Because they're members of your party as well.
Yes, they're members of the party. But written without the knowledge and consent of those people. 80 to 90% of them are not even executives of the party. Somebody just created signatures for them, while the others are domestic staff of Mr. Cairo Jugbo.
All right, you heard that?
Yes, I heard. It's very funny. And this is the actual situation. I mean, this kind of behavior is what led APC, Delta State, to this, the state we are in right now. The state of crisis. And these people, they are not, they will not come out to tell the truth. This crisis didn't just start today. This crisis that he is trying to deny, but I remember, I think I heard part of it, he said it too, that he referred to the something, I heard him refer to something yesterday that like illegal faction. Though I didn't watch it, but I heard something like illegal faction. So if you say there is a faction, that is agreeing that there is a faction, which started from the Congress.
What Congress?
The
Congress, State Congress?
Yes, before the 2019 elections.
Okay.
So it's not today. So, and they just, the executive he is trying to refer to, that is the state chairman he is trying to refer to, and every other thing he is trying to refer to, were handpicked by the Deputy Senate President, Ovioma Agege.
Well, I do know that within the APC, I mean, this is something that a lot of people have wondered about. I mean, we've seen it before. There's usually the National Working Committee of the party, and then sometimes you now have extra roles given to leaders. For instance, we know that the current president-elect, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has identified as the APC national leader for many years, even though there was no such role provided for in your own constitution. So there have been questions as to, isn't that what is happening, translating at the level of Delta State, where you do not have a governor, but it will seem that the highest ranking government official there immediately assumes leadership of the party, even though there is no role for that person to perform at the national, is it the NEC level or the state council level? Isn't that what the situation, isn't that what has caused this level of rancor within your party?
Okay, thank you very much, Mokwe, for that question. You see, yes, agreed with the way, political parties are structured in Nigeria. The highest political office holder in every state is assumed to be the leader of the party. But Mokwe, you must agree with me, we are in a democratic society. So, and being in a democratic society should cross across broad in everything we do. And now this is a political party. The fact that so you as the leader, if whichever way it is, would not give directives to everybody in the party. No, I'm sure you people should know. Omagege has fought with virtually everybody in the APC Delta State. He has fought with everybody, including even Festus Keyamo. They will fight to the man who was even the leader of the party Ortega Omero. They fought. It was just before the elections that he went to him.
But
so if
Mr. Keyamo has not made known. I mean, of course, they might have disagreement. I don't think, have they come to the public to discuss their disagreements?
No, they will not come. They are not come to the public. I'm sure you have not heard Omar Agege say, the Deputy Senate President say anything like that. But I am. And I know, and I'm telling you, and they know
isn't rancor normal? I mean, within political, even in any organization, isn't that normal? Isn't how people manage it what is important?
Yes, it's in every society, even at home, in your own family, there are disagreements. But the point is, what is the disagreement? If, for instance, you say you don't want anything from anybody, it's either what you say or nothing else. So if you imagine now, let me tell you, according to them, they said all these people he's talking about, imagine like the Cairo Jugbo they are blaming. Omar Agege have not spoken with Dr. Cairo Jugbo for how many years? But just from nowhere, Omar Agege set up a campaign council, and boom, Dr. Cairo Jugbo's name is there. There are a lot of the others. Chief Ima Ejiofor, who is, his name. These are people you don't even, a lot of them like that. These are people you don't even talk to. And you see, he fights with everybody. Let me tell you something. Now, Omar, the Deputy Senate President, his problems are many. If you watch the APC, the Delta State governorship elections, you will see that he won 4 local governments areas. And just 2 days ago, the chairman of the NDDC board, governing board, Loretta Onuche, whom they also, I don't know if you've heard that too, they also allegedly suspended, right? Wrote on our Facebook profile and listed some of the things. And she said that in everything you do in life, there are consequences. So you didn't even pick any of this. You don't speak to all these people. You don't talk to these people. You fight everybody in Delta State. Meanwhile, PDP has ruled Delta State since 1999, right? So there is hardly a home in Delta State that is not affiliated to PDP. Now you want to go. Now APC is trying to take power from PDP, and you are fighting everybody. Like I've been telling his people, his aides, I said since over 2 years ago, I said it will be very interesting. I am watching how you guys will fight everybody in APC. Then when you finish that fight, you will go, before you go face the PDP that have been in government since 1999. I win. I said I would really see how you will do that. So they did not. He doesn't. Virtually everybody in Delta State.
He doesn't talk to them yet. He fights them. So he fights them by not talking to them.
No. What I mean, listen. This thing, like I told you, it started from the Congress. Okay. It all started from the Congress. And a committee was actually set up when the problem started, of 12 men. Dr. Cairo Jugbo was one of them. He himself was one of them. But from nowhere he came out, he said, no, he's not going to be part of it. He met with, I don't know, May Malaya Bumi, the then acting, So, and he said they've handed over the party to him. So whenever you're that committee of 12 wise men that was set up to settle all the problems in the party, he himself dismantled. He will tell you that power is taken. That is the language he used. Even his close aides and supporters, they will tell you. So he doesn't talk. And when everybody had to do anything, you would remember a lot of these when Lorette, we know, most especially from the Delta North. Everybody, if you watch the leaders from the Delta North, because Cairo Jugbo, he's from Delta Central, I'm from Delta Central. I'm actually from the same local government with him, Ughelli North local government. Cairo Jugbo is from Delta North. Loretta Onuche is from Delta North. And you fight all these people. So how do you want to, everybody, so the people of the Delta North, actually, what in 2019, prior to the 2019 election, there were suggestions that, the first Ibori, who is from Delta Center, did 2 terms. Uduaga, who is from Delta South, did 2 terms. Now, Okowa is from Delta North. And with this rotation thing in Delta State, in Nigeria, politics generally. So Okowa is from Delta North. If Okowa has done 1 term, if APC must do anything, APC should present somebody from Delta North, so that the people from Delta North don't feel cheated. But he said no, he pushed Great Ogboru to contest. And it is after that, for instance, he was the reason Great Ogboru left the party.
Okay, so let's go to Lagos now, because I understand they also have questions for you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mark. Indeed, some issues were raised by Mr. Fabruki yesterday, and I'd like you to respond to them. So there's been a suspension and counter-suspension, it would seem, a suspension of Mr. Karo Jogbo and a counter-suspension of the DSP, which Mr. Fabruki described as an action by an illegal faction of the party, which you also referenced. So how is Mr. Jogbo handling that suspension? At least you can speak for him to that extent.
Well, okay, thank you very much. Well, if you followed this, Dr. Karo Jogbo actually released a statement to that, and he called it a kangaroo expulsion, because you cannot just wake up one morning and order people to write a letter of expulsion. So Dr. Karo Jogbo is not bothered about it all.
All right. So, I'm looking at that letter dated March the 27th, and it says there are copies of a petition and recommendations from APC Ward 6 Committee, a petition from Chris Opere, recommendations from the APC Local Government Disciplinary Committee. And also speaking with Mr. Fabruki yesterday, he said, and I'd like you to speak to that Mr. Karo Jogbo held a meeting where he actually spoke to people not to vote for the APC's candidate and to vote for other candidates. Did any such meeting happen? Are you aware of that? Because that's one of the things that was described as anti-party activity, for which he was subsequently expelled, according to this letter.
Okay. There was no such meeting. You see, all these are just allegations. You see, the person who was actually involved in anti-party is the Deputy Senate President himself, who worked for Labour Party, who went into agreement for Labour Party. They didn't do anything for APC, even at the presidential, before the presidential election. They can bring them, let them come here, to tell you that, yes, let them explain why or how during the presidential election in 2023, in 2019, during the 2019 elections, Nigeria, the APC got over 27% of votes cast during the election. Then we don't have anybody. And now Delta State has the Deputy Senate President who think he's the most powerful man, and then APC could not even get 20% in the last presidential election. He worked for them. There was agreement. You will see there is some days to the election. Maybe you would have seen it. There is a video. There was a video that the Delta State Labour Party gubernatorial candidate and his supporters were going around the city of Warri. Use the video. They were cutting the pictures of Omagege from the picture of Peter Obi from Omagege's banners and posters all over the city. So you imagine you are a deputy Senate president and a government that is in power. You know, you have a party candidate. And meanwhile, they are putting your pictures and that of another candidate from another party to run when in an election. When the pictures of Tinubu and Shetima were supposed to be the ones in, and there is even another picture at his country home with other obedience, so these so-called obedient supporters with a banner. These things are out there.
Okay, Mr. Omogo, I think we'll just hang it up here at this point in time. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. We do hope that you guys are able to resolve the rancor within the House so that there'll be peace in Delta State.
Of course, that is what we want.
Thank you so much for coming in. Mr. Samuel Omogo is a member of the All Progressives Congress in Delta State, and he came to respond to Mr. Ken Ofobroku yesterday, who spoke and said some things against Mr. Cairo Jubo. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
And just before we go, we do have some comments feedback from the viewers.
Indeed, I see this one from Pastor Law Alpha Cross, who says there ought to be legal benchmarks for borrowings in Nigeria. This will help control the executives at all levels, executives there, I'm sure also referring to the states, from impugnacious borrowings. Okay, I've never come across that word before, but I think it means borrowings with impunity, if there's any such thing. I said, how much has this exiting administration borrowed, and to which extent have these funds been applied?
And then this one's from Festus Akimboewa. It says the legislative agenda of the 10th National Assembly must capture the challenges facing our country. The 10th NASS must focus its energies on key bills that will address insecurity, unemployment, more oil sector reforms, poverty and gender inequality, and limit its legislative ambition in other areas. And that's the feedback from the viewers today. Lagos?
Yes, thank you for your feedback. Of course, we'll take more of them tomorrow. And thank you for sharing your morning with us.
Yeah.
I am Bukola Koka.
I also acknowledge that tweet from Malam Sabiu Zaranda as well, saying that the new legislators are not entirely new. Some of them are former members, some are even experienced House of Representatives members who moved to the Senate. Others were at the State Assembly level. So to that extent, he says maybe they're not entirely new. But hey, thank you so much for all of your feedback. Here's wishing you a fantastic day ahead. I'm Kayode Okikiola.
Amal Yusuf, thank you for watching.
And I'm Neo Taigwe. Have yourself a beautiful day.